As the Occupy movement continues to go national, with some protests more organized than others. The latest include marches in Boston and New York, while many others are planned for the coming weeks, including the occupation of Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C. starting October the 6th. Story number 5 on the countdown. Occupy Wall Street is finding friends and allies across the country. And for an unstructured group that has yet to formulate any concrete demands, it also has a pretty good slogan to toss at the ultra-rich 1% that dominate Wall Street. We are the 99%, and we are too big to fail. Too big to fail and maybe too long in the same spot. New York's Zuccotti Park for New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. His Honor told a local radio program that people have a right to protest, but we also have to make sure that people who don't want to protest can go down the streets unmolested. You're worried about sanitation, and you're worried about lots of different laws on the books. And those presumably include the laws against police brutality, which Occupy Wall Street may have had in mind as they march on New York's police headquarters, following incidents Saturday, including pepper spray attacks on demonstrators and passers-by, and police tactics where certain high-ranking members of the NYPD punched through and stepped on peaceful marchers. Arrestees were handcuffed so tight their hands turned blue. But let us also be clear that when approached as individuals, members of the NYPD have expressed solidarity with our cause. No solidarity from Deputy Inspector Anthony Bologna when he pepper sprayed 4 female protesters, seemingly without provocation. Or when Bologna pepper sprayed several bystanders, including a uniformed police officer and a photographer with a New York press pass. We have details of that first assault today from Kaylee Diedrich, one of 4 women confined in an NYPD pen when Deputy Inspector Bologna approached with a spray can drawn.
It was definitely an unwarranted attack. I had turned my head just in time to be point blank pepper sprayed in the face by an officer, with the other girls who also got it as well. The pepper spray was directly in my face. It got in my eyes, my nose, my mouth, and on my chest. It felt like someone had poured hot, burning fire on my face and my body, and it was just, the pain was very intense. And at one point I couldn't breathe because of the pepper spray in my throat. I was on the ground at that point. I wasn't able to see. I started calling out for a medic, whether it was one of ours or the police officers. Luckily, one of our medics was called to us, came over and started taking care of me with some water, with some eye solution and some milk. I couldn't see for about 45 minutes to an hour. The burning lasted for a couple hours afterwards.
Kaylee Diedrich was not intimidated. She says it breaks her heart that 1% has the nation's wealth while everyone else is scrambling for change. The demand for change she represents was seen in San Francisco Thursday with a march through that city's financial center to Chase Bank. 6 protesters who entered and staged a sit-in were arrested. Outside, city supervisor and mayoral candidate John Avalos addressed about 200 marchers.
Have you ever felt like you've been had? That's right, this building right here is a symbol of the incredible greed and wealth that is accumulating into fewer and fewer hands in our country. And how did they stay wealthy? They took our tax dollars. They got bailed out.
While fewer hands have more of the wealth, more hands are joining in to change that. Occupy Boston planned an ongoing protest to start in the city's Dewey Square today. And in a few minutes, we'll talk to one of the key organizers for a major protest planned for Washington, D.C. next month. In Washington today, there was a major endorsement of the movement from a key labor leader, the AFL-CIO's Richard Trumka.
I think it's a tactic, and it's a valid tactic, to call attention to a problem. Wall Street is out of control.
And last night on this program, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont added his voice in an interview with Keith Olbermann.
My message is reach out to working people, reach out to the unions, reach out to the middle class, bring people together demanding real Wall Street reform so that the function of Wall Street is to provide capital to the productive economy, create jobs that we desperately need, rather than continue to engage in speculation and casino-type activities, i.e. real Wall Street reform.
Joining us now, the first major labor leader to lend support to the Occupy movement, John Samuelsen, president of Local 100 of the Transport Workers Union. John, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Why is the TWU getting involved?
Well, I believe to a large extent the protesters on Wall Street are singing the same song and fighting the same battle that our union has fought for the last 18 months. Basically, that working families in New York State are definitely getting shafted, while the wealthiest folks in New York State are getting a tax break.
What have your members been thinking as the protests have developed?
Well, the protests in the greater context of the protest are that New York State has just eliminated a tax on the wealthiest folks in the state, while working people are truly suffering. If you make $1 million a year, you're bringing home an extra $408 a week under the eliminated millionaires tax. We have a lot of folks in New York City that aren't even making $408 a week to take care of their families. So in many ways, the protest on Wall Street resonates with the working folks in our union who run the system in New York City.
I know that earlier you were checking in with some of your fellow union members to see how things were going. Any rough estimate as to how many members of your union took part in the protest today?
We have a couple of hundred members down there. The executive board voted to endorse the movement just about a day and a half ago. So as time progresses, we're going to have a more organized presence and a more coordinated presence. But certainly members did turn out today, and they do feel a sense of solidarity with the protesters on Wall Street.
What about in other cities? Will TWU members in other chapters also join those protests? San Francisco, Boston, Washington, D.C.?
I would imagine that's inevitable, and certainly our sister transport workers union locals in New York City have already reached out to us to put forth a unified front for the TWU in New York.
What do you hope that the protests, as they are joined, what do you hope that they will accomplish?
Well, I think the speakers that spoke before me just now, they kind of nailed it on the head. There's a sense of desperation, I believe, for working people and working families in this country that the folks that run government just don't get. You know, there's a lot of millionaires in Congress that have no idea, a lot of millionaires in the New York State legislature, for that matter, that have no idea what it's like to have to go out and buy a pair of shoes for children every month, or what it's like to have to feed kids, or pay tuition, or pay a mortgage. So there's a lot of folks in government that are out of touch. These protests, for one thing, have brought attention to the disparity in wealth in the United States that's developed over the last few decades.
Have these feelings about Wall Street in your particular union, your colleagues, have they been simmering for a while since the bailout?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think our union is representative of working families across New York City, and there's a sense of outrage. You know, just the attacks on the public sector in New York State, the attacks on public sector unions. At the very moment when the wealthiest New Yorkers are getting a tax break, there's efforts to balance the budget off the backs of public sector workers. We're a public sector union. There's an expectation that we're going to accept zeros and greatly enhance medical benefit contributions, while the wealthy folks in New York State are bringing home hundreds of dollars more a week than they were bringing home 6 months ago.
Any concerns that while the protests are now pretty effective in terms of catching on, they seem sort of, you can sense the passion there when you see those pictures and when you're down there, but they seem better in a sense at staging protests than in articulating their clear demands. Any concern about that?
No, not at all. I think one of the great benefits that organized labor entering into this fight will bring is an ability to articulate the message, and articulate that message on behalf of working families, whether they're in unions or not in unions.
Well, John, we certainly appreciate you coming in. John Samuelsen is the president of the Local 100 of the Transport Workers Union. Good luck to you, and thanks again for being on the show. We appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. With us now, a veteran activist who is playing a key role in organizing the coming protest and occupation of Washington's Freedom Plaza, Kevin Zeese. Kevin, thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
You got involved in this protest effort before Occupy Wall Street started up. What are your goals, and how do they fit into what we're seeing on Wall Street and around the country?
Well, as you can see on our webpage, October2011.org, going on the front page, we have 7 areas of policy where a supermajority of Americans take one position and the government is taking another position. We're on the side of the people. And a lot of it was articulated by your previous guests is a lot of what we're talking about. Jobs, taxing the wealthy, getting money out of politics, health care for all through an improved Medicare for all system, stopping the wars that are draining our economy and destroying so many people around the world. Those are the kind of goals we're putting forward. Our basic goal is end corporatism and end militarism, put human needs before corporate greed. And we've been working on our demands for quite a while. I think we're quite clear on them. I think they're the demands that people support.
Is there a specific step, though, that our leaders, our government can do towards those efforts?
Well, the problem is that it's all tied together with corporatism. And, you know, it's interesting that the corporate media doesn't want to understand that. You have 6 corporate media companies that control the news media. They don't want to understand that the problem is concentrated corporate wealth. It's not surprising they don't get that that's the problem because they're part of the problem. One thing we're doing at our event is we're advocating for democratized media. We're telling everybody who comes, they are the media. We can reach more people in the media if we work together to do it. And so come with your cameras. Come with your cell phones to take pictures. Be ready to get the word out. We are the media. We are the people. This is the goal, to shift power to the people away from concentrated corporate wealth. That's our goal.
Occupy Wall Street does seem pretty informal down on here in New York. Is there a core group that is directing the takeover of Freedom Plaza down in Washington?
There are about 45 members on our steering committee, and they cover a range of issues from people who oppose the wars, people who are concerned about the treatment of Bradley Manning, people concerned about the wealth divide, health care, the environment. We have a wide range of people coming together. October 6th, when we're starting, is the beginning of the 11th year of the Afghanistan war, a war that should end immediately. It's also the first week of the new federal fiscal year when we have an austerity budget for everything except for militarism. Environmental protection goes. Worker development of jobs goes. We're going to see a decrease in funding for human needs and an increase in funding for militarism. And that's why we started that day, to bring all these people together. We have 150 organizations who've signed on to endorse this. We have thousands of people who've signed up to attend. This is going to be a significant shift in the power of the United States.
How long do you expect to occupy the plaza down in Washington? What are you planning to do? Do you have the permits you need for all the activities? And how do you expect the local police and authorities down in D.C. to react?
Well, just like in New York, the police, are suffering with their pensions being threatened. In Washington, D.C., the police have had to hold back their salary to keep their health care. So they're part of the same problem that we're part of. And we're prepared for the police. We hope that they're cooperative and support our First Amendment rights. But we have peacekeepers. We have nonviolent trainings. We have people with cameras taking pictures. We have people coming from who are health professionals ready to provide health care. So, we have a lot going on to prepare for that issue. We're going to have a number of things going on throughout the day. We're going to have classes on developing alternative economies. We're going to have committee meetings on 15 issues. You can see on October2011.org we have 15 core issues. We're going to be meeting to discuss those. We've already been having a kind of an online assembly on October2011.org discussing those issues. So we're going to build the foundation of a movement. We don't think this is the end. We see it as the beginning. A foundation of a movement that does 2 things. 1 is trained in resistance so we can demand what we want, and 2 can build an alternative economy so we can opt out of the crony capitalist big business economy. It's a long-term effort, but it's an effort that we think is really going to shift the power back to the people.
And as you know, that effort can take a lot of time and a lot of attention. And again, back to the question, do you envision the protests in Washington as a one-day sort of effort?
No.
Or do you anticipate it's just going to continue essentially the same, as long as perhaps it continues here in New York?
That's our goal, is to stay and to bring people together. And the longer we can stay, the longer we stay will depend on how many people we have. If people come out and show the kind of anger that we know is out there as incomes drop and wealth increases, anger at the fact that 400 Americans have wealth equal to 154 million Americans, anger that our economy is worse than a middle-age feudal economy. In the Middle Ages, 2% of the people own 90% of the wealth. We're in a situation where 1% own 95% of the wealth. We're worse than the Middle Ages. We are serfs. It's time for the serfs to revolt.
Kevin Zeese from Baltimore. Kevin, good luck to you, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time.
You're welcome.